lots of reasons to study history at Corpus rather than simply at Cambridge.
Right, so the first question is just, how is the history admissions test structured?
Right, so we don't use the history admissions test here at Corpus, but you can find examples of the format of the test online. Normally, if I recall correctly, it's reading a passage and then writing an essay-based question on it. There's usually a little bit of choice about what question you answer, but you can find examples of that online if you just go Google Cambridge History Assessments and have a look at the past papers that come up on the university webpage.
But it's I mean, if you don't feel that that doing an admissions test will be your strong point, we don't use the history admissions test at Corpus, so we use a more holistic way of looking at applications, including your personal statement, interview, your teacher's reference. So if you don't feel that plays to your strong point, please do consider Corpus as a place to apply to, seeing that we don't use the admissions test.
One for Charles. A few people have been asking about sort of combining papers with other courses. So in particular, we've had students ask about borrowing papers from ASNAC, classics and English. Can that be done at all?
So there is a few papers which can be borrowed or rather shared. So I think there's one archaeology paper shared with archaeology. However, often it's the other way around. So we have papers which are borrowed by those other departments, and that's because the history faculty teaches that. So the history faculty has its own ancient history papers, so it doesn't need to borrow things off classics. It has its own Anglo-Saxon history papers, so it doesn't need to borrow things off ASNAC. So just because it looks like you can't borrow papers off those subjects doesn't mean that you can't do them. In fact, you probably have more choice in what you study by wanting to study Anglo-Saxon history in the history faculty than you do studying Anglo-Saxon history in ANZAC.
Thank you. Another question for you, Charles. Somebody's asked about particularly about the new history tripos. Is any more emphasis being placed on historiography than in the present course at all?
I don't think that there's going to be change in any change in emphasis in terms of approach, in terms of what we're looking for, when marking exam scripts, and there's no change in what we're looking for in terms of undergraduates, what we want in terms of our undergraduate intake, what skills we're looking for. So I don't think, I mean, historiography is important, but that's not going to change. It's more the when you're examined during your 3 years here is going to change, which is more of a procedural change than really a change in the type of history that you come to study in Cambridge.
Thank you. And then before we move back to some of the more recent questions, Michael, we had an admissions question that we get asked quite a lot actually at the moment.
Right.
So somebody's asked, will GCSEs hold the same amount of weight for this current cohort, given that they were awarded through centre assessed grades?
Yeah, I think we're going to take the view that the grade that you're awarded through the centre assessed grades should be treated as if it was an achieved grade. So that's we do trust the teachers and we trust their judgments of your abilities. So if you get an 8 or a 9, we'll treat that as an 8 or a 9 earned.
Thank you. Will, I'll hand back to you now to take some of the more recent questions.
Okay, so we've got another quite general admissions question, which is how beneficial would an EPQ be in the application process?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that one. So EPQ, that's extended project qualification. It's not offered by all schools, and it never really forms part of our offer. So we never ask for a particular grade in an EPQ. Having said that, I mean, it's a nice structured way to explore a topic beyond the confines of the syllabus. And if you're doing an EPQ related to the subject that you're applying for, i.e. history, and you're doing some great reading and you can talk about that sensibly in a personal statement, I think that could be really beneficial to an application. However, if your school doesn't offer an EPQ, you're welcome to go out and do some of that reading in your own time and include that in your personal statement. So yeah, I mean, if it's on offer and it's relevant and you're interested in it, I'd say by all means do it.
And Charles, this is probably a question for you. This is what sorts of essays are the best ones to submit as examples of written work?
That's a good question. I think we advise people to send one piece of work completed under timed conditions to see how you perform in an exam situation. And when we ask for one piece of coursework which has you've had time to work on at home, or it's either a piece of homework or a piece of coursework. However, if you haven't done one of each, which might be the case due to COVID-related disruption, you can send two of one type or the other. However, we are looking particularly for the essay you homework or coursework essay. We are looking for an essay which has done wider reading around the subject and engages with historiography. So I think if you've got a choice of essays to send one where you try to engage with historiography and try where you're balancing several different perspectives from the literature written about the subject, and which explains which side you think is less convincing, more convincing. That's the sort of essay we're looking for.
Okay. And this is quite a general question. Would a gap year harm my chances of getting accepted?
Yeah, I can take that one. So for gap years, you can either apply for deferred entry. So you apply in a particular round, you say, look, I'm going to take a gap year and then apply afterwards. Or you can choose to take your gap year and then apply while you're doing your gap year. And either of those approaches, I think, is fine. The one thing I would suggest is, if you are taking a gap year, it's a very good idea to think very carefully about how you're going to remain academically engaged with your subject. So, if your plan is to do maybe a bit of traveling or work overseas, come up with a plan of what books you're going to read, and maybe do an open university online course related to history. It can be amazing how, if you take a full year away from a subject, just how much you forget. And then if you were to apply at that point and get an interview, you could be very rusty indeed. I mean, Charles, do you have any particular views on the gap year thing?
So I don't think it helps. Taking gap year either helps or damages your chance of getting a place at all. But I think the important thing is, if you are planning to take a gap year, or you are taking a gap year, keep reading, keep writing, keep your skills and history going. I think that's important. You'll find the first few weeks of any university course easier if you've continued to build on your skills during a gap year than if you've let them rust away.
Is it likely that interviews will be online, presumably next admissions round?
Yeah, I think a formal decision has not yet been reached, but in my opinion, it's probably likely that they will be online, just because we don't quite know which direction the COVID crisis is going to take us, and particularly with international applicants and some restrictions on international travel. I have a hunch that it will probably be online for the coming round. But as I said, no formal decision has been made yet, but I imagine the university will communicate it fairly soon. I would say, having been through remote interviews for a round, it actually worked reasonably well. And I think, there's a lot of advantages to being interviewed in the comforts of your own home or your school, and not having to get on a train and come all the way down to Cambridge. So, it's not ideal, but I think, it is fair, and it does work, these remote interviews.
So I think, Charles, this is probably one for you again. What career support / employment opportunities are provided for history undergraduates at Cambridge?
So we have a very active university career service, and there is somebody whose full-time job is to help and advise history undergraduates on what careers they want to go to. They offer very good support and also continuing support once you've graduated as well. But what they always say to people, and what they've said to me, is the only problem is that we're there to help, but they need to come and find us in the careers service. And admittedly, the careers service is located next to the college, so there's a huge amount of resources available. There's lots of employers who target Cambridge for graduates in their graduate recruitment efforts. And the thing is that so there's huge opportunity. The thing is that you have to embrace it once you get here. So there's huge amounts of help, huge amounts of resources, huge amounts of opportunity. Whether you want to do a corporate style graduate scheme, or whether you want to do further research in history, or whether you want to do another alternative career path from charity sector, teaching, various other forms of career. I mean, there's even one history graduate from Cambridge I know who became an opera singer. So there's all sorts of opportunities available after you've completed a Cambridge history degree.
Would Cambridge consider running an English and history course in the future, since there's one at Oxford but not here?
For the 2022 and 2023 intakes, most likely there's no plans at the moment. I mean, who knows what might be the case in 10-15 years time, but in the timelines that most of people here are interested in, no.
Does this relate to what you were saying earlier, though, about like the the modules being able to study things technically from different papers? Would there be scope with people having an interest in English as well?
I think having an interest in literature helps, and interest in historical fiction does help your general knowledge about a certain period and how it's represented. But I have to admit that there's probably not much opportunity to study Shakespeare on the Cambridge history course as it currently stands.
If we do a gap year, can we be asked at interview why we did this?
Well, I think it would be, wouldn't be unreasonable for the interviewers to ask, how did you remain engaged with the subject during your gap year? I mean, they might not be interested, particularly what country you traveled to or what job you were working at, but I think they would be interested in what books you read.
Yeah. So
we did give an offer in this the next kind of intake to somebody who did take a gap year, and we did ask them at interview what they'd been reading, how they'd been keeping up with history. So we do ask those sorts of questions.
This looks like a good question. Would you say that you can have a competitive application if you're only studying 3 A-levels?
Yes, yeah. I mean, our offers are based on 3 A-levels. So as I mentioned in the initial presentation, A-star AA is our typical offer for history. So 3 A-levels is absolutely, that would make you a competitive applicant.
Would we be able to talk about essay competitions in our personal statement instead?
Yes. So if you do mention anything relevant, and one relevant thing would be essay competitions you've entered and what the results were. But on the other hand, if you haven't entered any essay competitions, don't worry, that won't damage your application. And I don't think Corpus hasn't offered a essay competition in history, at least for the last few years. So if you do win one of those, it's nice to put it down, but don't feel that's necessary prerequisite for applying to corpus.
Presumably talking about an essay competition you've entered, even if you haven't won, or just writing a super curricular essay, that's useful stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah, and do mention if you've what you've written, because it shows that you've shown some that you've been proactive outside what you've been studying at school. But you can show that in other ways. You don't have to show that by entering an essay competition.
Thanks. So Will, I think we're probably going to wrap it up just to give everybody a bit of a break before Emma's presentation. Did you have one last question you wanted to pose to us?
Let's have a look. This might be a useful one. This is someone asking whether MOOCs are as valuable as research. I'm sort of assuming like just researching the stuff yourself. So what's I suppose, what's the opinion on taking online courses? Interesting.
Charles, do you have a view on that?
I think they're both useful, and often it depends on what is their what is their content. So if you tell us that you've done a MOOC in remedial maths, having done some historical research is probably more impressive. But if you've done a MOOC in a challenging and history-related MOOC, we'll be very, very interested in that. So, but if your piece of research was, if your piece of research wasn't, turned out to be 100 words long, the amount of research you've written, a related MOOC might be more interesting. So, can you see it's what's in the MOOC and what's in your research, or which probably matters more than us saying a MOOC is better or worse than a piece of historical research.
Good. Thanks very much.